My name is Kelly O'Brien, and I lead both the Chicago Central Area Committee and the Alliance for Regional Development. If you're not familiar with those organizations, the Chicago Central Area Committee, CCAC, was created in 1956 to have the business community, higher education, and other thought leaders look at how best to position Chicago to be the global destination that it is today. The Alliance for Regional Development was created in 2012 following the publication by the world's leading think tank on economic development, the OECD. And the OECD does what they call these territorial reviews all over the world, but to date, the only one in the United States covers our mega region, which is defined as the Milwaukee, Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana. We are very fortunate to have all three of the leaders of the Metropolitan Planning Organizations as our guests today. And I just want to do a shout out because they are part of the Alliance Board of Directors. And they have brought a tremendous amount of wisdom and leadership and helping the Alliance be the organization that it is today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Yes, thank you, Kelly.
Be here.
You. So the plan is I'm going to share a little bit of your backgrounds. Then we are going to give you an opportunity to help the audience understand your long-term comprehensive plans. And then there's a variety of topics we want to cover. And I do want to invite the audience to ask questions. Please use the Q&A button, and I will do my best to relay those questions and get answers for you. So first, going in alphabetical order, and it just worked out that it's ladies first, I would like to introduce Erin Aleman, who is the Executive Director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Cmap. And Erin had a big year in 2019. She was unanimously selected as the Executive Director for Cmap and also recognized by Crain's Chicago Business as someone to watch 40 under 40. And that, of course, is always a huge honor. Prior to taking the helm at Cmap, Erin worked at Metro Strategies and Policy and Advocacy. She worked at IDOT in leadership roles, and she actually was at Cmap prior to the current role, where she worked on Cmap's first long-term comprehensive plan, which was Go-To for 2040. And now, of course, is overseeing the On to 2050 plan. So Erin, is there anything about your professional background that I've missed that you want the audience to know?
Only that I worked pretty closely with Ty on the 2040 plan development when I was there the first time.
Well, I was going to let the audience know that there's that history. And just to kick things off, Erin, is there anything that you can share, anything fun that you've done since the summer started? You know, we'll use Memorial Day weekend as the unofficial start of summer.
Well, we've had a little bit of fun. We got a hitch put on the back of our car and have been doing family bike rides. And we went camping in the neighboring Indiana Dunes National Park. So that's, pretty fun for us.
That is excellent. It is always good to hear how people are still able to create safe and yet really fun family plans. Next, I would like to introduce Kevin Muhs. Kevin leads the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, also known as SewerPAC. Kevin has a distinguished career at SewerPAC. He was led their new Vision 2050 plan. And so he knows that plan inside and out as the executive director. Kevin, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Kelly. You?
Excellent, thank you. And what about you? Have you done anything fun this summer?
We've been having lots of fun because my wife and I welcomed our first child, our son, in late February. And so we've spent basically any time I haven't been figuring out work from home, just experiencing everything new he's learning as he grows quickly here, too fast. So.
Oh, congratulations, Kevin. What a wonderful benchmark for your family. And as bad as COVID has been, one of the benefits is being home and probably being able to spend more time with him than you would have otherwise. So that's wonderful. Excellent. And Ty, how are you?
Doing well, Kelly. Thanks. How are you doing?
Excellent. And I think Ty has been on the Alliance board the longest. I don't remember exactly how many years, but at least 4 or 5, I would say.
I would think so. It goes fast, but it's been a while. Absolutely.
And of course, you have a very interesting career, certainly serving as the executive director of the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, also known as NERPC. You have served as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Illinois, Chicago. As Erin mentioned, you were part of Cmap's family back in the day, and you left us for a few years and lived in Kansas before coming to Indiana. Is that right?
I did. I had the opportunity to be on the ground floor of putting together the first regional council to be formed in this country in at least 20 years. So it was a really unique opportunity to go out there and essentially start a new sewer pack or Cmap or NERPC from scratch. And they're a wonderful part of the world. I got to do my plug. If you travel to Colorado, you know, so many people are so anxious to get there, they miss something absolutely spectacular in the Flint Hills of Kansas. So stop at Manhattan, Kansas, go check out Fort Riley, Kansas State University, the Flint Hills, last vestiges of native tallgrass prairie. Make that stop and you'll love it.
Excellent. And have you been able to do any traveling or had any fun additions to the family or anything that you'd like to share?
No additions to the family, but I think as you said earlier, it's just, we've actually, you know, I have great sympathy for all those that have struggled during this time, and I know it's not been easy for a lot of folks, but the silver lining of some of this whole situation is my family has absolutely loved spending the time together and just to being together during this time. We've read a lot of books, played a lot of games, just had some really good time at home.
Good. Well, of course, I am so pleased that everybody is healthy and your families are healthy, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. So Erin, let's start with Cmap. Can you help our audience get an understanding of onto 2050, maybe any changes from what was the go to 2040, and just kind of the major highlights of the long-term comprehensive plan?
Absolutely. So 2040 plan was adopted in 2010, and then, you know, we're required to update that every so often. So it just so happens that the 2050 plan was adopted in October of 2018. It's really focused on 3 core principles: inclusive growth, prioritized investment, and then really a region that's prepared for climate change. So these long-range plans really help us focus the actions and the policies we want to implement in our region, but we can't do it alone. So we've been working pretty closely with our county governments and our local government partners and civic leaders from across the region to help us think through, you know, how do we continue to leverage transit as an asset? How do we continue to really build on our strengths of transportation and logistics in the region? How do we protect our water systems to make sure that, you know, as we look to the future, we're more efficient, but also that we're addressing critical flooding needs that's happening. So we've made progress on a number of those things, but we certainly haven't solved any of those issues. And there's a lot to do, and there's going to be even more to do after, you know, we come out on the other side of this pandemic. So that's just a brief synopsis of what you'll find in our plan.
Thank you. And for, you know, we have an audience from all 3 states. So for the sake of the audience members that are not familiar with the Chicagoland area, will you share which counties your Cmap oversees?
Absolutely. So from the border of Wisconsin down, we've got McHenry Lake, and then we've got Kane Kendall out to the west, and DuPage, Cook, which the city of Chicago is located in, and Will counties. So we sort of, if you were to take that sort of arc right along the bottom of Lake Michigan, that's what ties us together. And, you know, Ty and Kevin, I haven't been to Wisconsin yet since quarantine, but it's certainly close enough that it's on the list. The people who live in the region don't necessarily care about what municipal boundary or county boundary they live in. And I think we see that across the region in terms of how people move and how economies work and how transportation systems work. So, it's really critical that we're coordinated as much as possible to make sure that our limited resources really provide the best return on investment for people in our region.
That's excellent. And Erin, as you know, I sit on the Economic Development Committee for Cmap, and I just have to acknowledge that the staff, the team at Cmap, they are always so professional, so helpful, so responsive, and I really enjoy the opportunity to be on that committee and meet with so many important decision makers in the Chicagoland area. So I know that, again, you've got a great team and you're doing a wonderful job. Let's turn next to Kevin and the Milwaukee area. Again, maybe we can start by just sharing with the audience the footprint that you oversee, and then maybe some highlights on the Vision 2050 plan.
Absolutely, yeah. So similar, I guess I'll follow Erin's lead, going north to south along the lakefront. SewerPEC serves 7 counties, and it's Ozaukee County and Washington County, and then Milwaukee and Waukesha counties, and then the 3 counties essentially between the Milwaukee metro area and the state line, which is Racine, Kenosha, and Walworth counties. And our, as Erin said, our experience is that particularly the further south you go, the more that state line really doesn't matter. And so the economic flow of goods is pretty free between that, and the flow of people and ideas and everything else is as well. So our long-range plan, our land use and transportation plan, is called Vision 2050. We completed it back in 2016. So actually, Erin mentioned that we're required to update these plans every once in a while, and the minor update requirement from the federal government is every 4 years. So actually just last month, we completed our 4-year update. And as part of developing Vision 2050 and looking at it from a 4-year update perspective, we really tried to take stock of where the Milwaukee metro area and all of southeastern Wisconsin was compared to peer metro areas across the country, and tried to do what we could to continue to make recommendations as an agency and work with our implementing agency partners to improve quality of life and make the region economically competitive. And so what we found is that we do relatively well on congestion and things related to automobile travel. Particularly the Milwaukee area, for a city of its size, is quite easy to get around using the car. But we don't compete compared to a lot of our peers across the country on alternative modes of transportation. And so that was really a focus of Vision 2050, is transit, bicycle, pedestrian facilities, things like that. And then we also spent quite a bit of time talking about land use and things that Erin brought up related to water quality and dealing with changes in water quantity with flooding and things like that. And so we also addressed those recommendations in our plan and what we feel is the most efficient and cost-effective way to develop for southeastern Wisconsin.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Ty, can you tell us about NERPC?
Yeah, of course. So we are almost on the same cycle, but not quite. So our 24, as the 3 of us, I mean, so our 2040 plan was 2011. We've gone on to our 2050 plan also. We built on the 2040 plan and the vision that was pretty strong with that. We did a whole series of workshops of people weighing in on what needed to be tweaked from that previous vision. So it's still based on a region that we see as being connected, renewed, united, and vibrant. And then we focus on the 4 focus areas of economy and place, environment, mobility, and people and leaders. So you take those 4 vision statements, those 4 focus areas, and we have 16 critical paths. And we took a little bit different approach with this plan update that I think is going to be interesting as we deal with the outgrowth of COVID-19 and everything, is that rather than a scenario process where we developed multiple scenarios and then picked one and went for that scenario, we did a process where we determined several future states, different ones. And so we tried to adapt our plans so that the projects that get funded through us as an NPO have the best impact, best effectiveness within each one of those possible future states. So it's like trying to look at different possible outcomes and how you fit inside that. So that is the approach we tried to take with that, and that links us a little bit better to our funding streams, we hope. But like has already been said, that state line is very porous. We do a lot with Cmap. Not only did Erin and I work together before, but work with each other now and see Kevin quite often as well. And also our colleagues in Southwest Michigan, who I think are on this call today as well. And there's a lot of fluidity taking place there. We've been very active in an organization called the Calumet Collaborative that's very new, that helps to further break down that state line so that the whole shared common history and cultural geography between our part of the world and south part of the Chicago area, doing all we can to try to make that more fluid. It's just one big economy, and we all benefit by growing that economy together.
Well, thank you for saying that. And that certainly is the theme out of the OECD report and the mission of the Alliance to help people adopt that mentality. Now, the OECD report had to have a start and stop point, and it concluded that the 21 counties in the Milwaukee, Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana corridor operate as an economic unit. But the message of the report was to connect the dots when and where it made sense and not be tethered down because of state lines or county lines. And we have been very fortunate to loop Michigan stakeholders into our work, and I welcome them to today's webinar, and I welcome Michigan stakeholders to get more active with the Alliance, and I look forward to having those conversations after today's webinar. So, we're all aware that COVID-19 has been a big disruptor. And I think one of the questions that is on the mind of many of our stakeholders is COVID changing any of the current plans, the Onto 2050, Vision 2050, NWI 2050? Are you planning to have any amendments to the plans that were published? Or just basically, how are the MPOs dealing with COVID disruption? And maybe we'll start back with Erin.
Sure, sounds good. I think that's some of obviously the conversation at hand that we're having in the office. Well, not in the office, virtually in our virtual office every day. But, in terms of the goals and objectives of the plan, the 2050 plan really set forth a data-driven way of looking at the investments that have been made across the region. And so it highlighted that there are places where investment was lacking and in a systemic way across our region. So we through the planning process identified a number of areas across our region that we called economically disconnected and disinvested communities, where we were able to sort of say, look, these communities are majority minority, majority limited English proficiency. Their access to the job centers is just, there's a disconnect between the transportation systems to get to the jobs and the places where the homes are that are affordable to folks or even rentable to folks in those areas. So from our perspective, we really have focused our work plan this year on how do we fix this generational opportunity that's in front of us? How do we take advantage of it and make sure that as we're thinking about transit across the region, that we're establishing a way for transit to continue to be the backbone of our economy, right? And I know there's a lot of concern about, people's trust that transit is clean, but from the operational perspective, things are, they're cleaning more than they ever have before. But how do we build back that trust? And I think so we've, taken a step back from some of the projects that I think we wanted to work on, like automated and connected vehicles and figuring out how policies revolve around, helping our local governments address those things that are coming. And we've said the bigger priority for us right now is to figure out how we, really take on some of the structural, systemic racism problems that the planning field and the transportation field also, I think, is somewhat responsible for, right? That zoning laws, how do we educate our local officials on how zoning laws really can stand in the way of having more equitable outcomes for communities across our region. And from my perspective, I think personally, it's we are only as strong as our weakest communities. So if we can find ways to distribute, and grow wealth, make sure that there's good access and opportunity to jobs, and make sure that our transportation systems and our housing systems, allow for growth and opportunity for everyone, that really helps our economy overall and should be seen as a real opportunity for us. So we'll be focused on still the long range plan things. I mean, I think, you know, if you think about flooding impacts communities of color more than if you were to look at the statistics across our region as well. So if we can shore up some of these things, I think that the future will be better for everybody.
Perfect, thank you. And Kevin, I know in Wisconsin that there's been conflict between the governor and the legislature, and so there's been some back and forth with what's happening in Wisconsin. Maybe you can touch a little bit, update our audience, and also again share how that has impacted the Vision 2050 plan and what, if there's any amendments that are in progress.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. So when I guess it became clear that COVID-19 coronavirus was going to be impacting the state, the governor did declare an emergency, as many of his peers did across the country. After he extended that emergency in April, there was quite a bit of unhappiness with that, I think, within the legislature, at least the Republican Party side of the legislature. And so they did sue, I believe, and the state Supreme Court determined that the governor had indeed overstepped his bounds based on how they were interpreting that state law that the governor was utilizing. And actually, it was the Department Health Secretary, Secretary of the Department of Health, sorry, who was utilizing the emergency order powers. So since then, I think, you know, we as an agency have really tried to focus on what we can do locally and within the region to address the immediate health crisis and support our departments of public health across the region and support other local governments as they try to navigate it. In regards to our long range planning, as Erin said, it's been interesting because you do kind of, it's our job to keep our eye on that future horizon, but there's certainly incredibly urgent needs related to what we're seeing and what's going on. And so our staff, we were actually going to update our comprehensive economic development strategy for the region either way. And now this has put a quite a different focus on that. And in particular, you know, our comprehensive economic development strategy has always noted the disparities in the region that Erin mentioned as well, that certainly happened in Chicagoland too. But I think this will heighten the focus on those disparities, just as we've seen obviously the reaction to George Floyd's death, but then also the disparities in impacts related to COVID, the disease itself, and then the economic impacts. I think everybody is very focused on how far behind communities of color in our region fell after the after the Great Recession, and we really are trying to do what we can to avoid that happening again. All that being said, you know, we still feel that the recommendations in Vision 2050 are really important recommendations. They're all about economic strength and prosperity for everybody in the region and trying to raise all communities in the region. And so, and really, as Erin said, try to invest in those that need that investment the most. So the way I talk about it with the public is that on the margins, things may change as we watch how transportation behaviors and other investment behaviors change throughout the country and in southeastern Wisconsin. But the root of the plan, the recommendation to focus on historic urban cores, focus development in areas where there are people who can work those jobs, and focus on connectivity between people and jobs, those recommendations still stand, we think. So.
Makes sense, makes sense. Ty, I know that there is also a spike of COVID happening in Indiana right now. How does Northwest Indiana compare to the rest of the state? Higher, lower, kind of, is it evenly spread? And how is COVID impacting the NWI 2050 plan?
Yeah. So, and I don't know that I specified before, our region covers Lake Porter and LaPorte counties. So basically the counties that are on the southern shore of Lake Michigan is the region that we have. So basically drawing that line from Milwaukee around the coast, that's the region that we serve. And I also should do a shout out to our colleagues in Maycog around the South Bend area. They're also on this, found it as well. It's just a regional plan fest right now. So congratulations, Kelly, on bringing everybody together, even outside this panel.
That's always my goal.
Hey, you succeed. So there you go. We have, so our areas like Hammond, Gary have had some spikes, and so Lake County in that mix has had some challenges in the number of cases. There are quite a bit of different types of communities all throughout Northwest Indiana, and so you see all types of different responses in the infection rate. And as we see just countrywide, that's not necessarily correlated to areas that happen to be more dense. Just like I think Kevin was alluding to earlier, we have a big part of our plan, the promotion of more walkable, livable communities. And some of the knee-jerk reaction to the COVID-19 issues is that, oh, density, we have to sprawl back out, when we've worked so hard to try to highlight the difficulties and disparities right in a land use pattern built into sprawl. And so there's a temptation to react that way to this current situation, but that has not borne out to be correlated to the density and walkability of areas. And I think as we recover from this and emerge from our homes and businesses get back on their feet, you're going to continue to see the desire to have those places that are more human, more real, more walkable, and all the rest. So I don't think we will suffer from that once we get through all this. We also, in our Unified Planning Work Program, we all have as a requirement of our MPOs to do a work program for how we're spending our federal dollars on our staff time, and that's publicly available. If anybody wants to see any of the nitty gritty that any of us do, it's all there in a federal document. We put into our latest Unified Planning Work Program that we just adopted recently a specific item to look at the effects of COVID-19 in social and environmental issues, public health, transportation, unemployment, food security, a whole host of things. So we do plan to study this in much more detail. I think the initial impacts are still a little bit new to be able to get a good data of what COVID-19 has wrought, other than the obvious things like unemployment and whatnot that are reported on frequently, that are kept up to date more frequently. And I think we've all been involved too in things like Google's mobility data and other sources that show where people are traveling during this time. And as you might expect, there was a drop off in retail trips and other things, but trips to parks and open spaces have been increased. And I know for a fact, just anecdotally, we have a very popular, let's see if I have a copy here to pull in front of you. We have a very popular greenways and blueways map that we supply to libraries, coffee shops, everything all over the region. And it's an anecdotal story, but I think it illustrates the point. Is our requests for that map to find out where you can take your bike and where you can kayak and all those kind of things, that has spiked during this crisis. We have gotten numerous requests, more so than usual, and it was already popular. So I think that tells you what people are wanting to do during this time and how folks are trying to cope during all this. I'll just close, just to say, I just remember I was at Will County, their planning director there at one point, and I was there long enough ago when we were doing our 2020 transportation plan, which is wild to think about because now that 2050 seems so far out there when we were looking out to 2020. And what strikes me as I was just thinking about this in preparation for talking to you today is just I remember during that plan that, you talk about your assumptions built into the plan. And one of the assumptions in there was that gas prices won't increase significantly, et cetera. And I remember right after that plan was adopted, the gas prices increased. And so, right away, we had something that was not really anticipated. And I don't think, I think it's safe to say, I could be wrong because I don't know every, jot and tittle of everybody else's regional plan, but I don't think any of our plans took into account the possibility of a pandemic and that we would be, doing this, lockdown situation where we see those kind of impacts. So all that to say, as I think we're all going to be studying that much more closely into the future, but I don't think the general thrust of the 2050 vision for us either is likely to change significantly in the overall vision for where we see Northwestern Indiana going. It may take a little bit longer to get there, depending on whether this is a pretty quick recovery or a slower recovery. But I don't think the overall vision is going to be diminished in any way.
Thank you, Ty. So as I mentioned, there are a number of topics that we want to cover, and we do invite audience questions. I ask that you please use the Q&A button if you would like me to relay a question to our speakers today. So I'm going to jump right to some questions that have already been submitted. And the first question is, what strategies are you looking at to rationalize the last mile delivery in an effort to reduce congestion? So who would like to start?
I'm fine jumping in, but I feel like I've just talked a while, but I'll try to be brief. We have, a big part of our region is that we're super excited about is the expansion of commuter rail. Our partners at the Northern Indiana Commuting Transportation District and the Regional Development Authority have worked, tirelessly to have these projects to increase our commuting options into Chicago. Will greatly increase the speed. So double tracking of the South Shore line that goes all the way to South Bend, hello again, Maycog. And also new rail line, the West Lake, as in Lake County, Indiana, West Lake corridor that comes along the Illinois-Indiana state line down through Munster and Dyer out of Hammond. So super excited about those things. And the Indiana State Legislature very wisely and rightly adopted transit development districts around each one of those station locations to incentivize transit-oriented development. So I say often in Northwest Indiana, we have a lot of price points in Northwest Indiana. You can buy pretty much a home in any price point you want. But I think we are lacking some key housing types in our region that are attractive to certain segments of the population. And although we've had some areas that have worked really hard on creating vibrancy and walkability and livability in their downtowns, we have some that are much more challenged in that respect. And so I think I'll answer the question by first saying, we're trying to get the transit-oriented development in place to be able to provide that walkability for folks to bring uses and a mix of uses right at the station locations, first of all. And then working on how do we work with our other organizations and our transit providers like the Gary Public Transportation Corporation and others to be able to sync with those new transit-oriented development locations so that people can get to their homes and to the station and to those new opportunities for retail and for jobs. So that's part of the picture that we're looking at, I think, is how I'd address that.
Thank you. Erin, would you like to address that for the Chicagoland area?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I just wanted to start with framing it a little bit in terms of what we've seen in terms of highway traffic across our region too. So, when the stay-at-home order went into effect, we saw, about a 40% drop in traffic overall. But, since late March, we've seen that passenger vehicles have only been down about 10% below February levels. And then we're actually seeing an increase in the single unit trucks. So UPS or FedEx trucks, delivery trucks on the road. So, clearly the data is showing that more people are continuing to get stuff delivered to them. But before the pandemic, freight and transportation logistics was something that we've been working on from the planning side for quite some time. So we've been working really closely with Will County and other areas and South Cook County as well to understand the impacts of this last mile challenge, right? Because there are lots of great things about getting things delivered to your doorstep, not just personally, right? I don't have to do anything that's extra time that I have. To probably reduce fuel consumption, and because it's more organized way of getting stuff delivered to you. But the impacts are really challenging for communities. Not only is it noisy, the air quality can be terrible air quality impacts to communities that have those logistics, transportation warehouses near their homes, and again, disruption, safety challenges as well. And asthma, higher rates and incidences of asthma. So I think, we have been trying to figure out how tactically we can address some of these issues by making sure that we have the data, by getting on the ground, by talking to communities to sort of figure out what their goals and objectives are in terms of the freight, right? That everyone wants jobs, but do you want that right next to your house? And so I think this is one of the things that we are going to continue to look at moving forward, is how do we better understand that last mile? And then also, what's really going to change? Are people going to go to the grocery store as much once COVID is over and once we have a vaccine and we're all back to normal? If that new normal is different and if industries are disrupted, and I really value the time savings that I have in some of these things, I think that there could be some continued long-term changes that again, we'll need to have some planning strategies for communities so that we're thinking about the noise and the pollution too, and how do we address those challenges at the same time.
Thank you. Kevin, I know you're really passionate about multimodal transportation systems, and so how would you respond to the question?
Sure. I think I will admit, on the freight side, so your last mile can mean two different things, or it can mean many things. But in my world, anyways, it either means delivery, which Erin just addressed really well, or it can also mean the connectivity of the people. So you're talking about the goods, or you're talking about the people. And Ty was talking, I think, and about the people. And our work, probably because we aren't the logistics hub of the entire country like Chicago is, has focused more on the labor force side of things and on connecting people to jobs and solving the issue of, the transit system gets you 90% of the way there, but that last 10% into the business park probably doesn't, at least in our region, it doesn't usually exist. And so we really struggle with that as a region, and we've been focused on working collaboratively with employers across the region on solutions that can connect to those transit hubs, whether that be exploring partnerships with the rideshare vans that VIA runs or that Enterprise owns, or working with Uber or Lyft. There's a major employer in our region that has a standing contract with Lyft to assist with employer last mile connectivity issues and getting those employees to that business location. And we did have a small part in making that happen and enabling that connection. And so that's really how we've been thinking strategically about last mile issues in the region. I do want to acknowledge what Erin brought up, because although we don't have the type of as many of the type of distribution centers as you would in like a Will County, we do have challenges in different parts of the region when it comes to what to do with delivery vehicles. And it has to do with how they are crowding the street, and you want to be sensitive to the delivery driver and them being able to work in decent conditions, but also causing hazards and safety issues with where they pull over and where they stop their vehicles and how they stop their vehicles. And so we have been working with some of our more urban communities on guidelines and developing tactics to deal with that issue as well.
Terrific. Thank you. We have a specific question for Erin, and it reads, in Chicago, what is the status of the southward red line extension and are new stations on existing CTA rail lines anticipated? Thinking of the new Fulton District station at Morgan, as well as the vacant station at 63rd and Racine.
That's a great question. I won't claim to be CTA, the Chicago Transit Authority, because those are their projects that we're talking about. But I know that, prior to COVID, the extension of the Red Line South is one of their top priority capital projects, and have been working really hard to get the EIS, the environmental impact statement, and support documents done so that they can move forward on that and figure out how they fund that project. I think one of the challenges that we're going to see to any of those being accomplished is the loss of revenues for transit specifically. And thinking about how we fund transit is one of the critical things that we as the Chicago MPO plan on working on moving forward. If we're seeing reduced revenues to the Highway Trust Fund and the way that transit is funded through fare box recovery, there were a whole period of months where CTA and Metra and PACE not only weren't collecting fares, but the ridership was down somewhere around 5-10 at most. I think the bus lines, CTA's bus lines, were at like something like between 15 and 20% ridership of their normal riders. So, that is going to have some lasting effects here. But I do think that access to the far south 130th Street, far south side of the city, is going to be critical to economic recovery for communities. And not even just economic recovery. I think just equity, just in fairness to begin with. So But there are opportunities here for us, I think, to think through, you know, things that aren't on rail, right? We've got buses, they can move different places. So how do we find the data that we've been looking at? How do we elevate the data that we've been looking at for where essential workers live and work, and what industries are they related to? Is it grocery? Is it medical? Is it, you know, and how can we use our most flexible systems of transportation to get people to where they need to go? I think that's sort of the lifelong planning question, is how do you get people to jobs and back and forth? I think now that we're going to be forced to have to look at things differently, we can perhaps be more nimble and solve some of these age-old problems. And if we don't, then I'm not sure that we're focused on the right things.
Well, it certainly would be great to make something good come out of this. Ty, a question from the audience reads, in Northwest Indiana, what is the status of double tracking the South Shore route, and will Amtrak be part of a greater commuter rail networking in the area?
Great question. So we just had a commission meeting this morning, got an update on these projects. So it's very fresh. You know, obviously there's contingencies that can happen, but if all goes as planned, the double track should be service in fall of 2023, and the Westlake Extension Corridor should be in service in fall of 2024. So that's the time frame we're looking at. It's looking very, very positive on the federal level. There's essentially been a commitment to fund those projects. So it's looking very, very good, and pretty much all but set. And then I have to credit, you know, Congressman Visklosky. This is his last year. He's decided not to continue on, but he has worked tirelessly to bring these projects about, and we're very, very grateful for that. Amtrak is a bit of its own entity, does run through our region, at least one Amtrak line. I'm not sure exactly. I think they work on that access through our corridor, just like NICTI's had to work hard to maintain good access through the corridor. So I don't think Amtrak has necessarily been at the table as a commuter type strategy as well. But they're certainly in the picture.
Excellent. So the next question reads, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are in rapidly increasing demand and increasingly adopted overseas, with many large corporates seeking zero emission vehicle solutions. Do you see local support for this cleaner, quiet, and more effective environmental means for the large over-the-road transportation through our busy Midwest corridor? And Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think, and I think the very end of the question kind of touched on exactly the use case we've been seeing and hearing discussed. I won't pretend that we've suddenly seen these appear all over, you know, our roads. I think that would be true for all three of us. But battery electric vehicles, I think, are probably the leader when it comes to a personal vehicle or a smaller use case. But I think there does appear to be some recognition that there may be some benefit of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, particularly for things like semi-trucks and moving large objects and larger and masses of goods as opposed to people. And so we certainly watch that. We pay attention to it. We help our local governments when they have questions about it, or sometimes we let them know they should have questions about it and be prepared. But as far as the technology development and adoption itself, we have a pretty limited role in that at this point. So I probably shouldn't comment any further beyond that. So.
Fair enough. Erin?
You know, we haven't spent so much time looking at hydrogen fuel cells, but one of the resources that we do have in this region that's really great is Argonne National Laboratory, that does a lot of research and analysis on these exact issues. So, I mean, I would hope that there would be more local support for transitioning our fleets to be more greener, especially as I noted earlier, we did not see the same level, or maybe I didn't say this, but if I did, so I'll apologize if I'm repeating myself, but we didn't see the same level of air quality increase in Chicago as we did, as the ports on the East Coast and the West Coast did. So during this pandemic, as things shut down, many cities like LA saw cleaner air quality, and they were able to sort of look out their window and not see smog like they had in the past, largely due to, you know, things shutting down. here in Chicago, we actually didn't see much of that at all in terms of increased air quality. And that's largely due to the fact that we are the central hub of transportation and logistics moving through across the country. So as hand sanitizers and cleaning supplies needed to keep moving, so did our freight. And so it is going to take a number of strategies, including some of these transitioning fleets in the future, if we actually do want to impact our air quality in a positive way.
Ty, have you and your team looked at this at all?
We have really strong partners in the South Shore Clean Cities group, and that works very closely with us on alternative fuel options. And so I would defer to them on the details of hydrogen fuel cells specifically. But I will say, I'm afraid I'm a little fuzzy on the exact timeframe details, et cetera, but I think 8090 was just designated an alternative fuel corridor. So, and I believe that has to do, do you know more about that, Erin? It's charging station locations, more opportunities for being able to take alternative fuels. And I'm not sure if hydrogen's a part of that picture or what that is, but it looks promising in any event, so.
Terrific. The next question that's been submitted reads, what data sources are you most in need of now to effectively assess COVID impacts on a regional basis? Are there any data points that you think need to be collected on a more regular or geographically detailed basis moving forward? Erin, you got a thought?
I do have a thought. I mean, we do have lots of data at Cmap to be able to make decisions, and I think we're getting access to some pretty cool tools. We have access to a big data tool through the Illinois Department of Transportation that looks at, cell phone data, and it's more amazing than sort of these 10-year modeling surveys that we do, and allows us to be a little bit more nimble in terms of travel demand and that sort of information. But I do think, continuing to look to the future, if we're going to be successful in economic recovery, I think the workforce data and unemployment data, getting that more frequently. I know that we've had challenges just largely due to the influx of unemployment claims being submitted, getting that as frequently as we would like to be able to help our workforce partners be able to move forward. The other thing too that I've been thinking a lot about is that a lot of big projects require these cost-benefit analysis, and they're very data-driven, but they actually aren't as focused on performance measures as I think that they could be. So integrating things like how different projects are going to impact quality of life, how they're going to impact the local economy effectively. So I think that there's probably some good work and data that could be done to look at the way that we do cost-benefit analysis for major projects and begin to incorporate more environmental or water impacts and things that are more important to communities on some of these projects. So that's not specifically a data set that we need, but I think a bigger sort of data question that and calculation I'd like us to start looking at.
Thank you. Kevin, data?
I think, almost similar to what Erin said, as far as transportation data goes, with the onset of smartphones and the way that that data has been able to be anonymized and yet is also kind of omnipresent, we've really, I feel like as an agency, we're still tackling what do we use this for. We've come up with plenty of interesting use cases, but we keep thinking of new ideas as we go and learning from peers across the country, including those on the call, regarding how they're using that data or those data. I think I don't want to completely echo Erin, but I will say that our biggest challenge is job information. So unemployment is a piece of that and is very important as well. But we find that, frankly, reliable information on the number of jobs and the type of jobs and wages and things like that, for various reasons, including competitiveness reasons, companies don't want to share that information always, can be some of the most challenging things to put a pin in. And so the way we've been doing it historically and we've found most reliable is very labor intensive on our part. And it's really only something we can do every 5 or 10 years because it takes so much work. And so as I'm now getting to the end of our data from 2010 and 2015 and looking to 2020, I'd love to have better data. And in particular, as we've seen with COVID, it's almost like if I had collected data last October, I should throw it all out now because the job situation has changed so much. So that's really a challenge that we find as an agency that would help us do a better job of serving our communities if we had that information. I'm not sure how you'd collect it though. So that may be a wish, just a wish, you know.
Ty, anything to add?
Yeah, I don't want to echo Erin or Kevin, but I know just because we're all required to do this anyway in our long range planning, we have to assess performance-based metrics and whatnot. And so I know some of the challenge in trying to figure out that data, it's not so much the data points itself as the frequency that to have some meaningful inputs. And so that's an issue. I will throw into this mix. We were just in the process before this came about of combing through a household travel survey that we had done in partnership with Cmap. Just to let you know, there's a good cooperative partnership alive and well to maximize dollars. We did this in partnership with Cmap and piggybacked on their efforts. And as we've been combing through this, I would love to have that information again on the household level again right after COVID, after we kind of recover. I don't know that that will be feasible because of the cost involved in that, but I will use that opportunity to talk about what I think will be exacerbated by COVID, which is in comparing the study that we did in 2018 to the previous household travel survey that was done in 2008. The amount of, we already picked up right away from that pre-COVID, that the amount of travel to retail for shopping trips dropped from 21% of all travel in 2008 to 9% in 2018. So there was already that decrease in retail trips prior to COVID-19. Now people, I think, are much more used to ordering online. If they didn't before, it's much more a part of their life, the whole, you know. So will that continue on? Will that get worse? Will that, what will that trend be? And I should just chime in here. I'll leave this to the economists that study this much more closely to really opine. But I had watched a panel not too long ago that I thought was really insightful, that was trying to step away from the term retail apocalypse, and where that is tempting to want to see this downward spiral of brick and mortar stores dying. The thrust of this panel was that the data apparently shows that there may be quite a bit of right sizing happening from over expansion of retail opportunities, but most that I have heard are still enthusiastic about brick and mortar is not going away. Particularly as we talk about with experiences and downtown locations that are becoming more experience oriented and whatnot, but people still want to be tactile with things. And so although there may be a significant adjustment and maybe a pulling back in from what was currently expansive, it's probably way premature, if not downright wrong, to necessarily say that we're in the midst of a retail apocalypse that is only going to be exacerbated. I think there'll be actually a hunger to try to get back out and reconnect with things that are physical rather than these two-dimensional screens we're looking at right now.
I think that's spot on, Ty. And in fact, right before we started this webinar on the TV, they were talking about a survey that Yelp conducted and released that I think it said 40% of the restaurants that closed for because of COVID do not plan to reopen. So when it comes to brick and mortar, you know, there's going to be a lot of real estate that's going to need to be repurposed, and it's going to require real thought leadership on how we recreate these communities. Going back to our audience questions, and I thank the audience for wanting to interact with our speakers today. So the next question is, with your wish list hat on, if we remain in a COVID world for the rest of 2020, what regional project that currently has funding would you like to see implemented on an expedited time frame?
That's a great question. That may take some thought.
So projects that are underway now. I mean, one of the things that I noticed, you know, in Chicago, in the Chicagoland area, you know, watching the morning news, and the expressways, you know, were empty while we had our stay-at-home orders, and it looked like a lot of road work was able to get done maybe in a quicker time frame than otherwise. Is that true, Erin? Were they able to get things done quicker?
Yeah, I think our implementing agencies are seeing that there's a lot of, that they're expediting projects as fast as they can right now. I know that, you know, a lot of finishing final contracts on the Jane Burns Circle interchange have been signed and are underway. And so I have to imagine, I don't know, but I have to imagine that they have been able to make significant progress on that. And I know too, the tollways under construction, 294 as well, and they've made significant progress on that as well. A little tongue-tied here. So I think we're seeing that happen now, but I think that some of the concerns are, you know, those things are already obligated and money is already there for those. I think as in Illinois, we're in a pretty decent spot in terms of revenue, that we doubled the gas tax and indexed it to inflation at the beginning of this year, this calendar year. So on the state side of things, we have more money than we had in previous fiscal years on the state side of things. But if the Highway Trust Fund, again, is impacted from sort of national motor fuel tax receipts overall, that's a reduction in revenues as well. So it remains to be seen what will happen to the Highway Trust Fund, although I suppose a positive is that, you know, Congress has been willing to transfer money from the general revenue fund to the Highway Trust Fund to help keep it solvent. But I think the latest date was that they were looking at sometime next year to be insolvent.
I think April of 20, yeah,
Sorry,
April 20, April of 21, I think is the latest that I saw, yeah, which has moved up. So, and for those folks that don't, yeah, that are watching that don't know how this works, when you buy a gallon of gas, 18 cents of that goes off to Washington, D.C. and then comes back to MPOs like ours, is allocated to us to do local, or at least regional transportation projects. So everything feeds into that Highway Trust Fund. And during the last transportation bill, Congress, like Erin alluded to, Congress basically cobbled together funds to fund that. And but we, as we have tried to have good policies to reduce our reliance on gasoline, and speaking of hydrogen fuel cells and other things, that's a policy that works against that 18 cents per gallon of gas going into the Highway Trust Fund. So it's a real issue that Congress is going to have to address. We're going to be right back in the same situation we were 5 years ago of not being able to fund the things that are crumbling.
Well, that is certainly something of concern, particularly for our mega region, as it is the hub of transportation for North America. Kevin, is there anything that you wanted to add to answer the question on
No, I
expedited?
don't think so. I was just going to say, you know, our issues and our experience in Southeastern Wisconsin is usually trying to find funding. Once we can find funding, we can implement things pretty quickly. As you noted, Kelly, I mean, I do think that there were some projects that did get moved around to take advantage of less traffic, which is a good thing. And then therefore impacting the public less because they were using those facilities less. But our big challenge usually is finding the money, not implementing once we have it. So.
And I would jump in. I got going on the Highway Trust Fund issue on the federal level, but those rail projects that I talked about, you know, the sooner that we can get people to jobs, especially in a situation where there's increased unemployment, that would be the better. So my default would be if I could move those projects up even faster, I absolutely would.
You know, you mentioned the Highway Trust Fund and Washington, D.C. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience in terms of what is happening with Washington? And I know that they're talking about a potential new bill, but have any of you been involved with the CARES Act?
Yeah, so I could jump in on that. So just on the transportation aspect, first of all, so the House passed HR 2, which if you've been following the news, the Senate has already indicated they're not very likely to pick that up. We'll see how things play out, but I think it's just relevant for our region, particularly for those areas that have freight connectivity. We started a rail crossing task force earlier this year. And it looked at these whole issues of Indiana was a little bit late to the party, so to speak, from other states of their Supreme Courts that have struck down the provision to ticket trains that have blocked an intersection more than 10 minutes. That just recently happened, relatively recently in Indiana. And we had already started to see the results of that. Stories of ambulances not being able to cross tracks, of parents literally helping their children through the railroad coupling to get to the school on the other side. I mean, crazy things like that. And even police chiefs talking about the increased instance of road rage they've seen, if people have spun out of those lines waiting for, you know, the crossing and to try to then speed to their next destination in a hurry. So big issue. And one of the things that we hope will carry over into whatever transportation bill ultimately wins the day is a provision within HR 2 that deals with these blocked crossings. does on the federal level what we're not able to do on the state level. And because of federal preemption of railroads and whatnot, that's really where the solution needs to come from. Also includes a provision for a grant program for crossings. So, you know, whatever else happens in the transportation world, that's one provision we hope follows on. And then CARES Act, which is, you know, a separate issue related to COVID-19. You know, there was a host of FTA, Federal Transit Administration funding that became available that I think we all worked very quickly to get distributed to our transit operators to take advantage of those funds. And my staff really worked really quickly to do that. And we had just received NERC designation as an economic development district. That's from the Economic Development Administration from the U.S. Department of Commerce. And that designation had been over 10 years in the making in Northwest Indiana for a variety of reasons. And having just gotten that designation at the end of last year set us up to receive funds that became available for the CARES Act. Because again, like we talked about, who could have seen this pandemic coming and that this money would be available. So we're pleased to be in that position to be able to be the recipient of funds that can help on economic recovery from those from the impacts of COVID-19. And we're retooling to step into this new area at NERC and to build up that whole economic development program to be able to work with our partners in Northwest Indiana that are already heavily involved in the economic development space to fill that niche of using these CARES Act funds and other funds through the Economic Development District to marry federal opportunities to real world needs that we already are aware of.
Great, thank you, Ty. And Erin, if I remember correctly, Cmap is not a direct recipient of CARES Act funding, but you do have a role that you're playing with the counties.
Yeah, so you're correct in that we don't receive an allocation of the CARES Act, which is really, you know, continued aid for communities and counties impacted across the country by the coronavirus and needing to purchase and procure things, PPE and whatnot. We've been working with Cook County by using some of the data and performance measures tools that we use. So when we allocate our transportation resources across the region, when we allocate our technical assistance resources across the region, we have a data tool that looks at population, household income, median income of the community, and really a number of equity measures. And we were able to weight those measures again. And we've been using that tool with Cook County so that they can make decisions and layer on data like the impact of COVID on different communities and COVID deaths to distribute that formula funding out to the communities in an equitable way. So it's been a pretty exciting opportunity for us to make sure that our data tools are going beyond just Cmap. Excellent.
And Kevin, what are you hearing from the Wisconsin delegation, and how has Sewer PAC been involved with CARE Act funding?
Sure. So as far as DC, you know, we continue just like our peers to watch the transportation bill and what does come out, because I think, as Ty mentioned, there was, you know, the House bill that came out of T&I was very different. Frankly, it was kind of a new look at transportation infrastructure investment, and I think there were a lot of things that were attractive in there, but it came out pretty much along party lines, which is always concerning when it comes to something like transportation. Usually it's a more bipartisan effort, so that was different than usual. Under the Senate, it was a little bit more stay the course, but just some fine tuning around the edges from what came out of the Environment and Public Works Committee, and so we've just been talking with our delegation members about the different bills. Our senator, one of our senators from Wisconsin, is on EPW in the Senate, so we did talk with her staff back when EPW was drafting that bill, and so we've been in coordination and conversation with them about that. And really, we view our role when it comes to things like that as advocating for our local governments. And so we usually try to push for more mechanisms for local governments to have control over federal transportation funding that comes in. It's very state heavy right now, and we've found that those decisions don't always reflect the actual needs of the communities in our regions. So we try to push in that direction if we can. When it comes to the CARES Act, we are not a district like NERC is fortunate enough to be. And so our role when it relates to accessing CARES Act funds has largely been trying to work with our communities to develop competitive applications for the portions of the CARES Act that are competitive grant opportunities. And so we've been trying to do what we can to support people with data and things like that to help them access those funds.
Thank you. Well, this hour certainly went by very quickly, and we are a few minutes over. So to the audience members, if we did not get to your questions, I know there was some great interest from many asking about green energy, and we will share the questions that were submitted with our speakers and try to get answers for you. We do appreciate your time today, and I do want to thank Erin, Kevin, and Ty, most importantly, for all that you do for the Alliance for Regional Development, for being great stewards of the MPOs in our mega region, and for taking the time to join us today. I do want to remind people, this is the OECD report. It has lots of information on how to grow the regional economy. Many of the points in that report were reiterated in a report that was recently published by SewerPAC and on its website. The OECD report can be found on the Alliance website. So I encourage you to take a look. And I do want to remind the audience that we will have our webinars next week, and the following week we'll be pausing in August. Now, a week from today, we have Lou Raisin, who leads Broadway in Chicago. So we'll be having a really important conversation on the role of cultural institutions and how do we really open up when our cultural institutions have been so impacted by COVID. And the following week, we have the Secretary of Commerce for the state of Wisconsin and the head of the Greater Milwaukee Committee. So we have some wonderful programming. We appreciate your support. And I also just want to do a little shout out. One of my colleagues that sit on the Economic Development Committee for Cmap, we've been members on the committee for years. Joanna Green is retiring from the Chicago Cook Workforce Board. Joanna has, she's been a great friend, a great resource. We're gonna miss her, but we wish her so much happiness, health, and a great life in retirement. So Joanna, thank you for everything you've done, and I do look forward to keeping in touch. With that, we'll sign off. Wish everybody stay healthy, stay strong, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.